Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to my channel. Today, we will be discussing the HBO series True Detective. Now, season 4 has recently concluded, so I thought it would be fun to rewatch every season, and particularly because I've only seen each season once, the seasons I watched, I've only seen them once, and so I thought it would be a good idea to break down and rank every season of True Detective. I might as well, since I'm just going to talk about, why only talk about season 4? I feel like it's pretty unanimous that season 1 of True Detective is most people's superior season, right? Well, this ranking is a little different because I'll go ahead and give you a spoiler. Season 1 is not my number one. I pretty much disagree with that sentiment. I am going to be going through each season in order of my worst through best and giving a general breakdown of the season and my thoughts. Now, my history with True Detective is a little different. I was late to the party. I actually started at season 2 back in the day when that came out. I binged season 2 and then I binged season 3. And that's why I just said, the ones I've seen, I've only seen once. But I had heard about the show when season 1 came out, but honestly, I just wasn't interested. I just didn't care. It wasn't anything where I was like, oh, wow, I have to see that. So my first experience with True Detective was season 2. And I'm also not one to just wait for the episodes. I just binged it, and I actually really loved season 2 when I saw it back in the day. I loved it, and then I saw season 3 when that dropped, and I just binged it all, and recently season 4. Now, I do always binge the seasons, and I feel like I'm not sure if that plays a part in my experience versus everyone else's watching it just one episode weekly versus binging. Now, I know this is surprising, but I only just now watched season 1 of True Detective for the first time last week. So the one that's the most popular, I literally just got around to it. I decided to finally watch it once I finished with season 4. I actually tried to watch season 1 of True Detective years ago. I saw season 2 first, right? And I loved it. And then I went to see season 1 and I didn't even get past the first episode. I'm be honest with you. I just wasn't into it. I think it might have, I think I might have cut it off after 20 minutes. I don't even know if it was 20 minutes. It might not have even been that long. I feel like it might be because I started it after season 2, and those seasons have such a stark difference in tone and style. But honestly, I don't know. At the time, I just couldn't get into season 1. Ultimately, though, I love season 1. I was so blown away when I watched it last week. But I am going to start off talking about season 4 of True Detective. This was definitely my least favorite season of the show so far. And it's the season that I was the most hyped for. This is the first season with only one big name actor, which is Jodie Foster. I'm not sure if that was a calculated decision or not. Ultimately, it's not a big deal to the story, but I just found it interesting that this is the first season with its own little special name, okay, Night Country. The other seasons don't have their own little special name, and it's the only season with just one big name actor. Typically, we get some big names for our lead detectives. Now, season 4 follows an Alaskan investigation of the sudden disappearance of 8 scientists from a research station. At the head of the investigation is Sheriff Danvers, and after evidence ends up tying this present day investigation with a cold case of a murdered indigenous woman, Annie Kay, Navarro ends up being pulled in, and I think she was state police or something. I can't quite remember. Now, there is some really good stuff here in season 4. First of all, I absolutely adore the choice of location. I love the cold, isolated, dark setting of Alaska, and particularly this time period where the sun goes down and it's this eternal darkness for a season. Now, I don't think we utilize the setting how I would like, but I do love the idea for the setting of this season. I also love the idea of using this like corporate greed, conspiracy, environmental pollution, danger. I love incorporating those themes in the case and the mystery. At the top of the season, the way everything at that research station was so like shrouded in mystery. Like we had no idea like what are they actually doing out there. I thought that was really good stuff. Really good idea. I also thought it was a great idea to kind of commingle two separate cases. I don't like how it plays out, but I thought it was a good idea. Taking this cold case and connecting it to this current case so that we are following two interconnecting crimes with the expectation that solving one will in fact be solving both. Now, we did have Rachel McAdams in season 2 as law enforcement, but outside of her, we don't get female detectives on this show. So I did really love that we had two female detectives at the head of the case this time and solving things. But ultimately, the show didn't quite live up to the potential. Danvers was a pretty dull character for me personally. Kind of just nothing special. Navarro, that character was a lot more interesting to look at than to listen to. Loved her style as far as her look. I feel like the real life actress is probably way more interesting than the character, but there is just nothing special or dynamic with any of our season 4 characters. They are all painfully forgettable. First of all, there is no real distinction between any of our female characters. Like in the slightest. They are all just pretty much melding together. They literally all have the same basic traits. That hurts the story. That hurts it. That's just boring. Like for all they're too similar. It's not fun watching Danvers. It's not fun watching Navarro and the stepdaughter, whatever, she adopted daughter and all that. They're also extremely similar. Like they throw in some like racial prejudice stuff with Danvers, and I guess that's supposed to differentiate her from Navarro and add this like racial conflict with them. It didn't work for me. And speaking of, why the hell did Danvers have such an issue with her adopted daughter connecting to her cultural roots? That was so weird. She was like screaming at the girl, forcing her to like wash the stuff off of her face. I don't understand. Was there a point to that and I just wasn't smart enough to connect it? And also, none of the women for me feel like real people. They feel like cardboard, like generic cutout, one-dimensional versions of strong, outspoken female characters. Everyone is predictable when we're dealing with Danvers and Navarro. They do exactly what you expect them to do. They say exactly what you expect them to say. But I mean, the male characters aren't much better. My issue with Peter and his dad, Hank, is the fact that they aren't fleshed out enough for me to be such a big part of the story. If we're going to make these characters such a big part of the story and give them so much screen time, I need more. There's this disconnect and emotional estrangement with Hank and Peter that would have been interesting to explore. In general, I kind of feel like I'm always more focused on the crime, but if we're going to give them as much screen time as we did, we need to explore that. And Peter kills his own dad, and we see no effects of that on him. We see him dump the body with Rose, and then afterwards we see him, he's just perfectly normal. Seemingly, he gets back together with his wife and sails off into the sunset. Dad's blood on his hands and all. And Hank was working with the Mine Corporation, doing all this dirt for what? For why? What did he gain? How did it start? What did they give him for the stuff he had done for them in the past? He didn't kill Annie K, but he dumped her body. That feels really soulless. I need more on his character. But then when he is ordered to grab up Danvers' witness so she can't be led to the cave, Hank explicitly says he not killing anyone. And the first thing he does is kill old boy once he finally get to him. Like, no hesitation. I didn't understand. Like, what's going on here? Also, I was wondering what he was promised and what he was given for the stuff he'd already done. But currently he has made the promise like he'll be sheriff. The hell? Hank ain't want to do no damn police work the entire show. Why the hell he want to be sheriff? I was really confused as to why that would be a draw for him. Of course, common sense, there's a certain status and power or whatever when it comes with that title, but I just didn't understand or buy his personal character motivation in the slightest of why that would be such a draw for him. Ultimately, and you know, he hated Danvers, but I still didn't buy it. Like, this is huge crime, like, and stuff you're asking me to do. Ultimately, our characters really don't have much to do the entire show except sit around talking about the case in really uninspiring ways. But honestly, the character stuff is way more forgivable than the narrative issues that I have. Jodie Foster is Jodie MF Foster. I mean, she gonna be like good, enjoyable to watch or whatever, no matter what she's in. And I actually thought the actor who played Peter was enjoyable enough to follow. I thought he had a solid enough performance and had this almost like endearing, sweet, even naivete, charming energy. So he was enjoyable enough. I also, like I said, really enjoyed the actor playing Navarro. So while I have character issues, it wasn't anything, honestly, that like ruined my enjoyment of the season. It's issues that I was like, I couldn't look past, like whatever. What ruined my enjoyment though is the mystery and how we wrap things up. This is the only season where, for one, I wasn't like just jaw dropped, blown away. Like once the climax hits and the mystery is revealed, and honestly, the crime side, the mystery, like watching Danvers and Navarro trying to like solve this thing. I mean, I gotta be honest, it felt like following Encyclopedia Brown solving a mystery. I mean, it was very 8th grade detective solving like the mystery of the vanishing class projector or something. Something about it felt very amateurish. I just feel like we have faced such like pure evil, heart-wrenching, gut punch like type cases and revelations and consequences in the previous 3 seasons. This one falls incredibly short for me. It feels a little undercooked. While the actual crime of what happened to Annie K was heartbreaking and tragic, I felt no true emotional connection to anything, to anyone. This is the first and only season of True Detective that I didn't cry. And also just hearing the details of, I think it was the coroner's report on what happened to Annie K. That was actually way more impactful and hard hitting for me than watching it go down when we finally get the story. And, you know, when they have it on screen and they're like showing us, and then just the crime with the science, like, so the basic crime is Annie K is having a secret relationship with one of the scientists. She discovers they are aiding in this pollution of the town, in cooperation with the mining company, you know, giving these false pollution numbers. And all the scientists suddenly lose their mind and turn into psychotic, violent killers and murder her. And then fast forward to present day, the scientists are taken out out in the snow to be given to the spirit. And that's the case. That's the story. It's a letdown. It's a letdown for me. I'm sorry. And also, by the way, it was so inconsistent when we see what happened. What happened to Annie K in her own video that we see? It doesn't line up with what we see happen when old boy is telling Danvers and Navarro what happened. So much just didn't make any sense for me. Like, you mean to tell me that every single solitary scientist was down to suddenly turn violent and turn into murderers, and when one scientist walks in on the other scientist killing somebody, we just jump in? And then we just go back to life as normal, making sandwiches. Like, I don't understand. I just didn't buy anything. Like, I didn't buy anything at all. And then, baby, the random ass janitor women solved the cold case of Annie K in like 10 minutes because some water go down. That don't reflect well on our detectives. Who put Annie K tongue at the crime scene? That irks me. We never get an answer for that. What was with the oranges? What is that supposed to mean? Do oranges even grow up there? What did the one-eyed polar bear mean? Am I just not smart enough to get that stuff? But saving for last, my biggest issue with season 4, I feel like there was a really interesting exploration of cause and effect, decisions and consequences in the previous 3 seasons. Decisions were made and we are able to see the impact and the outcome of those decisions on our characters. That was missing here in season 4. And it truly hurt the story and the characters. Navarro murders an abuser in cold blood. There's no consequence. There's no impact, presumably, on her or Danvers, who's a part of it. They don't even seem to care about it outside of just not wanting to get found out. And I mean, I'm not a fan of things just happening and of no consequence to the characters. How did this affect our characters? You know what I mean? Like, seemingly, it was like throwing the orange in the trash. Like, they just didn't. It was a lot of other events that just was of no consequence. What was the point of Navarro's little sister and her mom and the mental illness? Nothing real is said about mental illness. A season that deals with corporate greed, science with no boundaries, cultural erasure, mental illness. It's somehow convoluted in theme, but it's no nuance. Nothing is said or explored outside of like, oh, these things are bad. Like, that's the overall gist of it. But I feel like we don't need the story to come to a conclusion for the audience, but we do need you to like say something and give us something to like work with. They put so many themes in here, themes that I like, you know, being added, but the show doesn't say much. It doesn't do anything with those themes. I said that was the last, but okay, truly the last. Okay, not a knock to the show or my experience with the show, but I guess like a nitpick that bothered me. Rose tells law enforcement that the ghost of a dead person led her to the dead scientist. That's how we find the bodies. No one bats an eye. Like, was that what we put in the official police report? The person who finds the bodies, particularly under odd circumstances, doesn't get interrogated? Also, what was the point exactly of having the exact same symbol here as we did in season 1, which I didn't know at the time of watching season 4. But when I went back afterwards and watched season 1, I'm like, wait, that's the same damn symbol. What was the point of this setting being in Alaska, which is where Detective Rust from season 1 was from? Like, I don't know, like, why add those things if it doesn't go anywhere or mean anything? I think this was overall a decent season of TV. Nothing groundbreaking, some good ideas, but ultimately, even though it was enjoyable enough to watch, it's just forgettable. Coming in next will be season 2. Different law enforcement agencies cooperate to solve a murder. Highway patrol officer and war veteran Woodrow. We also have Detective Velcoro and Sergeant Bezarides, as well as some other guy who wasn't a huge part of the story, but we find out that he was corrupt and actually did play a part in everything that went down, but he doesn't get a lot of screen time. We also follow a reformed mobster that's back to his mobbing with Frank. The mystery here starts when a corrupt city planner or something like that he was found murdered. Like I said, this was my introduction to True Detective, and I actually loved this season when I first saw it back in the day. Definitely flawed, but I thought the season was just truly amazing. I had such a good time with it. My biggest issues the first time and on this rewatch with season 2 of True Detective is Vince Vaughn's character of Frank. I'm not a huge fan of Vince Vaughn, but that's not a knock to the actor. He mainly does comedy, and I'm just not a fan of comedy. However, I always like him and enjoy him when he plays more serious roles. I absolutely love Vince Vaughn in Domestic Disturbance. Like, that movie is my ish, and I really like him in that. So I don't have any issues with his acting or anything like that here. That's not why I don't care for Frank. My issue is the character of Frank is wasted runtime for me. I like that they tried to do something different with this season, but with a show called True Detective, I want to follow law enforcement. I mean, I don't know if that's just me. Now, I also feel like we didn't really get good stuff with Frank. Now, Frank is a mobster who Colin Farrell's character, Detective Velcoro, is intertwined with as like a dirty cop. He is in the pocket and working for this mobster. Frank was also done dirty and crossed over by our victim that starts everything off, which is fine. Okay, we could have kept all that, but I just felt like we did not need to follow Frank and make him such a huge part of the story. He could have all those ties, but we ain't need to be following him. I don't know. It was too much for me, especially when we are already following a lot of characters and moving pieces that deserves a lot more attention. Now, I gotta be honest. I did love season 2 a lot less this time around, and I'm not sure if it's because I watched it right after I saw season 1 for the first time. I can't call it. And I mean, that season is better, but I liked it fine enough this time. I do feel like, why the hell did I love this? I loved season 2 when I first saw it. I do like how this season is different from the others. I like not having established partners, but instead putting these different cops together with each, having their own separate superior people, giving them each different agendas. And I love the California noir. I mean, this season had some really interesting and good ideas. Love the vibe. Love the whole look and feel of this season. Unfortunately, it wasn't the best execution, but not horrible. Still a good season of television. I did still really enjoy the season. I just didn't love it as much as I did when I first saw it. Now, honestly, I didn't care about the mystery or the case. Essentially, we're solving this murder of this heinous person, so I kind of could care less. He wasn't a very good person. Let him die. I kind of didn't care. Now there is a much bigger, aspect to this whole thing, not just his murder. We have rich, powerful men exploiting and victimizing women. I don't care. I kind of rather them tell a different story. I wasn't intrigued or particularly invested. I loved how, we had this like old simmering revenge, and that is what unravels this current conspiracy and corruption. Now, while I didn't care much about solving the murder case, I thought we got some great revelations with the mystery. I didn't even think about the son and daughter being a part of this. There's these stolen diamonds that's a part of this whole conundrum, and parents are murdered, and discovering the fates of the kids was so freaking heartbreaking. No telling what happened to the boy, but we know what happened with the girl. Visually, this season was really interesting to look at, and we got the most action here of any of the seasons of True Detectives. And they were so well shot, like so well orchestrated, an amazing airport scene. Even though some stuff felt a little contrived, but whatever, great scene. There was a great shootout sequence with like some goons and a pedestrian. It was like this huge shootout. It was so good. As well as Officer Woodrow and his shootout. But one of my favorites of the season was the shootout with Colin Farrell's character, Velcoro, in the woods, him up against this little squad that's coming after him. It's a great action sequence, which they all are, but this one particularly has a certain heart to it. And speaking of Colin Farrell, he gave an amazing freaking performance. Like, oh my God. Colin Farrell is one of those actors I just never paid attention to. This was good. He played in a movie I love with Terrence Howard, and this girl had like a scarred up face, but I never paid attention to him, but this performance was great. All of the performances were really good though, minus the lady who played Frank's wife. She was pretty terrible. Like, I'm sorry. And also she just was a terribly written character. Velcoro was definitely the standout character this season for me. Such a complicated and layered character, which I personally really like. His personal story was so tragic. I literally, oh my God, I called it. I knew when we are at that moment and he is home free, but sidetracks to see his motherfucking son one last time. I just knew that was going to be his downfall. And I feel like as law enforcement, he should have known better. Like, he should have known better. When we get to the end of his shootout in the woods, and the damn director just had to give us that close up and show us that his message was not sent to his son. Baby, that ripped my dang heart out of my chest. Like, that ripped my freaking guts out. I will say my biggest issue with season 2 is when Velcoro gets killed. Velcoro ends up getting information from Frank about this secret, like, love shack house, whatever, that our dead guy had. And Velcoro goes to check it out and gets surprised by another, like, masked intruder that's in there. And he gets shot in the chest point blank with like a shotgun or something. Y'all, when it goes down, it was so shocking and such a good scene. When the scene happens, I'm thinking like he'll get knocked over the head. I was not thinking he would get killed. But then they revealed that he's actually not dead. I feel like he was hit with buckshots or something like that. That was so lame. That was so lame. Either have the guts to go there or just don't go. Like, just don't do it. It reminded me of like in a movie when you get a really like fly, like shocking, great scene only for it to be revealed like that it's like a dream sequence and it didn't actually happen. Like, that's such a cop out and that's such a cheap look. I hate that. And I feel like it also takes the sting and impact out of what we just saw. And it's also pointless. You might as well have just had him get knocked over the head by the intruder and then just pass out or whatever. Like, it didn't have to be this dramatic when y'all wasn't even really gonna do nothing with it. I thought it was really interesting to have this common thread of denial between our characters, Velcoro, Woodrow, Bezarides, Frank. I like what we did with these characters here and how they're so connected, even though they don't really know each other. Outside of Frank and Velcoro, I actually feel like we had like a great cast here, good characters. I mean, all of our players, not just our main cops and Frank, the corrupt cops we get, the politician, I think it was a mayor or something. I thought everybody was really solid. Although when we get to the politician's son and that little stuff, it was kind of odd for me. But I enjoyed the characters, and most of like the fates of our characters I felt like was done well, except for Woodrow. I hated the like lying actress accusation subplot. It was really unnecessary and added nothing, and it wasn't entertaining in the slightest. Like, we could have given him a different conflict for his career at that moment. Outside that, it just wasn't good for me. The writing was really bad with that. Woodrow going into a trap that he knew was a trap and like getting set up because of for some reason he refused to like accept the fact that he was gay, which I didn't understand. I wish we could have like got more into that, because I didn't understand what was the big deal with him being gay. But whatever the hell, baby Woodrow, okay, who's played by Taylor Kitsch, by the way. But baby, getting out of this badass gunfight of like him versus 7 guys, initially unarmed, he earned his motherfucking survival. That whole sequence was so good. To get out of that and get shot in the back by an actor that's always playing a motherfucking weasel. If his character had to die, I'd rather he went out fighting and went out like the badass he was. This is another example of taking a sting out of the previous events. Like, he just took out an entire motherfucking hit squad by himself. Our main characters trying to solve this thing, they don't just face a corrupt system and like the case, they have to face themselves and their lives and how certain decisions have led them to certain places. And I feel like that was a good tie with all the seasons of True Detectives -4, is how we always are not just going through with the case, but our internal struggle as well. And I feel like they were all handled pretty well outside of the repressed gay cop. I don't know. I've seen people say that the story was difficult to keep up with. I disagree. There are a lot of moving parts, some unnecessary, but my issue was, while it wasn't hard to keep up with, it was hard for me to stay engaged the entire time. I was so uninterested anytime we had to see Frank. I kind of really was uninterested anytime Bezarides was with her dad. And I don't like how certain threads are wrapped up. It's just an unsatisfying way for me. The daughter of the Diamond couple is just put on the bus with some money. But what happens to her? She has had like a pretty tragic life. She's like pimped out and forced into prostitution. She needs some real help, not just cash and a bus ticket. I don't know. And then all those powerful, corrupt men, they just get away with what they doing. And yeah, in the end, we see Bezarides meeting with a reporter to tell the story, but that's just an article. Like, did anything actually happen? Were there any actual consequences for anyone? It's just really unsatisfying. But as is, I could say about every single solitary season of True Detective, it's never a quote unquote happy ending. Now, there are some serious pacing issues here. Quite a bit feels contrived, but honestly, that part didn't hurt my enjoyment, like just feeling kind of contrived. Some cheesy, on the nose, hard to sit through dialogue. That stuff was really hard to sit through. There's stuff that's presented to us as opposed to just unfolding organically. And I feel like that hurts the story. I absolutely hated Frank's death sequence, walking through the desert with different people from his life popping up, talking to him. First of all, we ain't that invested in this character. Second of all, we don't know the nigga like that. Like, why is his daddy sitting here talking to him? We don't know him or his relationship with his, I don't know. It just felt very unnecessary. Everything with Frank for me was so much wasted time that we needed to give to other things. I just didn't understand why we was dragging his death out. And it just wasn't a good scene. I mean, Frank is smart enough to outsmart the dang Russian mob. I think that was Russians, but gets taken out by these little thugs. And the whole setup with the car stopping in front of him, come on, man. I just felt like he was so on his P's and Q's, but he get taken out by these little scrubs. I didn't like that. I felt like Frank's character was set up to be so smart and calculating, and this is what did him in. It didn't fit for me, having him go out that way. And y'all, why that club could only get that one damn singer? Like, that's the only... I liked the music, but I didn't understand why that was the only damn singer that club could get. Why did they include Bezzarides watching explicit videos and having that guy she was hooking up with say something like, most women aren't into that, and I didn't know, something like that he was saying. What was the point of that? There was so much we needed to flesh out more and give more time and attention to. I hated that they threw in stuff that felt completely unnecessary, and that I feel like kind of went, no, like, why are we here? Like, what are we doing? Now coming in as my second favorite season of True Detective, Season 1, which follows two Louisiana detectives who end up on the case of a murdered woman. This leads them on the pursuit of a serial killer with occult ties over the span of about 20 years. If I had to list my favorite seasons of television ever, like across all series, Season 1 of True Detectives would definitely make that list. I get the hype of this season. It is definitely very well and masterfully crafted. I don't know what was wrong with me years ago when I first tried to watch this season. I just could not get into it for some reason. However, this time around, I was literally hooked immediately. I finally watched this season for the first time. Like I said, once I finished Season 4 of True Detective, y'all, when I tell y'all I stayed up to like 5 o'clock in the morning watching this mess, because I just was like, I can't end here. Like, I was ready to get to, like, I couldn't stop. I had to be at the end. I truly have no idea how people were waiting week to week for like each dang episode. Like, that's too much. Now, I do remember when I tried to watch this one back in the day, my mom loved this season and was asking me, and I was like, man, they just doing a bunch of talking. It's boring. Now, don't get me wrong. They do a bunch of talking. Season 1 is more deliberately slow pace, minimal like action. The tone is very dreary and drab and depressive. They take things to some really dark places, and a bulk of this isn't easy to stomach. I was actually very close to just cutting it off when we get to like this videotape. Anytime the subject matter is essay and kids especially, it's just really hard for me to stomach things like that. And a common theme I feel like of True Detective is leaving people who don't ever get their comeuppance, like people that are a part of acts, heinous acts. There is a particularly sickening video of essay happening to a child. There's like a group of men. It's like this cult. We catch this one serial killer, but a lot of people get to skate. Then at the very end, we have like a newspaper or news broadcast, something like that, where the allegations of this serial killer and stuff being like tied to or related to the sheriff or like this rich family, something that was intertwined in this. Like, it's denied. So there are presumably still very powerful people covering this up. we know in the end there was no real tangible justice for any of the women and kids. Whether justice is ever like real is debatable, but like the one girl in particular who we discovered is was the little girl in the video. I can't even really get into it. Just so depressive. Like, but there's never like I said, a happy ending with this show. The story concludes, and for me, it's just not satisfying. But I mean, where do you go? Like, it's like we just stay on such a low note, and that's not a knock to the show. As far as how they wrap it up, I mean, it's not satisfying for me because, like I said, it's just so drab and depressive, and there's no real justice, and you know, people don't get their comeuppance. But this season is so intense. I honestly do not see myself ever rewatching it. Again, that's not a knock to this season. I just don't like being put in certain moods. I just can't handle certain content. And another example, there is a little boy. I was like, when I was saying like no happy ending, no justice, there's a little boy and a little girl that Russ and Marty save. The little boy like had died, like I think a day prior. But the little girl is rescued. Well, I'm using air quotes and I'm using the term loosely when I say rescue because we see her later, like in later years in a mental hospital. There was no saving her. She was messed up for the rest of her life. There's a moment where she completely loses it when Russ is trying to ask her questions and ask her about the men that did this to her. So much of this is just so fucking dark. This season, as well as like I said with season 2, is very visually engaging. It's shot brilliantly. I said they do talk a lot, but this is truly some of the most thought-provoking. I can't talk. This is some of the most thought-provoking dialogue, and I'm just that person. Like, I like to hear things that make me kind of go down this rabbit hole of like thoughtful analysis. The questions the series raises on religion and death and the afterlife and personal discipline, etc. A big issue that I have with the series, though, is there isn't a character here that I like as much or find as interesting as Matthew McConaughey's Russ Cole. Hands down, he had the best lines of the entire season, and just like I said, the type of person I am when I watch things, like how I felt with Velcoro. I love a complicated character. I love a layered character. I personally feel like, for me, I don't consider people good or bad. I feel like we all have a duality of both. And I feel like Russ and Marty are both a great representation of that. Russ doesn't see good in himself, and Marty doesn't see no bad in himself. And I love that dynamic. I love the dynamic of them as partners, as friends, their interactions. They are just such distinct characters and so different, but they both have this common thread of their ego and feeling intellectually superior to the people around them. And the way it manifests in both of the characters is so extremely interesting to witness because it's so different. But y'all, when I tell y'all, now I said that Russ was the only interesting character. Marty is a very interesting character, but I couldn't stand Marty. You hear me? I could not stand him. He is the character that's all talking about Christian values and talking about how he was telling a third party how Russ needs a family and that'll fix a lot of things for him and just stuff along those lines. I'm saying, like, Marty, baby, you got a family and you just as unhinged and messed up as Russ. I wouldn't dare to even say worse. But Marty, it's like his stuff manifests in more socially acceptable ways. Marty pissed me off to no in the entire, like, I couldn't stand Marty. How you cheat on your wife, but then get angry when somebody alludes to the fact that you cheat on your wife, but bro, you cheat on your wife. So like, how you mad? Then how you got the nerve to get angry and jealous when your mistress, a single woman, by the way, is on a date. You run up in her house like a madman, and after getting caught cheating on more than one occasion, got the nerve to call his wife a hoe. Now, what she did, that pissed me off. But come on now, Marty. Baby, when I tell you I needed somebody to slap fire out of Marty, okay? Now, I also really couldn't stand, like, I could not stand the two black cops who are like, have a similar case, like when we fast forward in time and they are questioning Russ and Marty. Well, it's how the story starts, but it's like over different time span. They were just such idiots. They reminded me of the stereotypical dumb cops that you always see in movies and TV. I was just sitting here like, are y'all kidding me? If it weren't for Russ and Marty, their case would have never been solved. Like, they were so inept. Now, I also don't like how we wrap up this case and how we wrap up the central mystery. We have these murders, right, that are ritualistic and have religious aspects to them. And we're dealing with a meticulous killer, a mastermind, you could say, getting away with this for decades. But once we discover who the killer is, his house is a mess, like a hoarder's house. He's completely out of his mind. Now, I learned on Criminal Minds, okay? You have an organized killer and a disorganized killer. And typically, their house, their car, their workspace, that stuff reflects whether they're organized or disorganized. How can this guy be so disorganized and a mess in his life and his home, but not in his crimes? And then I feel like the ritualistic part and all that stuff with the murders, it didn't play into anything. Like, what was with the crown and all that other stuff that he just had to do compulsively when it came to the bodies and the women? Like, was I just not smart enough to get it? Because I was like, baby, we ain't going nowhere with that. We ain't do nothing with it. I just feel like a lot that we are told about the nature of these crimes was a kind of loose thread for me. It never really plays into anything once we actually come in contact with who did it. I also wasn't very intrigued with the reveal of the killer and who the killer actually turned out to be. The scenes that we get with him and his his wife, half sister, it felt wacky and almost out of place. It felt like I was watching a completely different show. I mean, the journey of discovering the nuance of good and bad in Russ and Marty was a lot more exciting for me than the actual evil villain that we get here. Now, the entire sequence of Russ and Marty going out to the house, Marty in the house, looking for the wife half sister, hearing her laugh and giggle as he looking through the house trying to find her. I actually love that. And then the sequence we get of Russ out in that maze looking for the killer, Childress or something. I think he was like the son of like the sheriff. Russ going through that whole maze with the Childress guy like whispering and leading Russ. It was so brilliant and suspenseful, so well shot and like genuinely thrilling. Like, I had no idea how it was going to play out. But as a whole, the ending and wrap up of the season felt a bit rushed and not fully fleshed out in the way that I would have liked. And coming in as my number one favorite season, you guessed it, the only one left, True Detective Season 3. The most similar to Season 1 in tone and how it is structured. Season 3 follows two detectives in Arkansas who spend decades investigating the crime of a murdered boy and his missing sister. We get some stellar, brilliant, mind-blowing performances in Season 3. For me, in my humble opinion, Season 3 is the best and most consistent ensemble cast. We got the best acting in this season with Mahershala Ali and Stephen Dorff as partners, Roland West and Wayne Hayes. Purple Hayes, my man. The guy who plays Tom Purcell, the father of the missing kids, and the lady that plays Lucy Purcell, the mom, as well as a ton of other players that we get here. There's a corrupt cop who ends up working security for the Hoyt family. We also have Michael Rooker as Edward Hoyt, and the indigenous military vet who played the trash man. I mean, just all the players around gave such breathtaking performances. And I feel like in each season, I can kind of pick out great performances. Like Season 1, for me, the best performances are our two leads. But this was the best ensemble of performances. Stephen Dorff, for me, was the most surprising performance. I really just know him from like his small role in Judgment Night and Blade and like a few other small movies. Like, no disrespect to that man, but those are most notably the roles I know him for. I did not know he had a performance like this in him, particularly when he plays the elderly version of West. That is where his brilliance really shines. I ain't really like young West. Like, good performance, but he that character was bothering me. Like, he was feeling real toting on the line of racist for me. And I really didn't like the scene when he's like, I ain't gonna say the word, but I want you to know why I'm thinking it. I just ain't like that character. For Season 1, I said that Russ was the only standout character, but we have multiple standout characters here. I feel like these characters are all so well written, even if we just get a small token of them, like with the trash man. And we also got some exceptionally shot scenes here. I could name them all, but just to name a few of my absolute favorites, when elderly Hayes is recording himself and of course dealing with the dementia or Alzheimer's, I'm not sure, but he's recording himself in his wife's office, and we see the soldiers like start to appear around him, the soldiers from when he was in the war, when he was younger, and you can hear the sound of a chopper. Just such a great visual representation of what was happening to his mind with this disease. The visual of how they represented time and memory with Hayes and West in the car ride when they are on the way to Mr. June's house at the end, who also was a character I forgot to name that gave an incredible performance. Season 3 has my favorite case. It deals with kids, so it's still heartbreaking like Season 1, but I love the aspect of how there is no evil per se behind the curtain of the crime. This is a case where things turn out tragic for everyone involved, all parties involved, even the bad guy who was the culprit of the crime, this mentally ill lady. This was an example of like an extreme abuse of power, a domino effect of what money and power and no boundaries, no accountability, nor any understanding of mental illness gets you. I love the aspect of no matter how smart of a detective you are or how good you are, some cases just cannot be solved. And that's how it felt here. For the most part, crimes can only really be solved by what detectives get people to tell them, right? For me, there was no incompetence here from our lead detectives. It's a situation where no matter what, they could have never solved this. Evidence was stolen. The fingerprints, evidence was planted. Secrets were kept. It's bleak, but it's reality. Hayes and Wes followed every single breadcrumb they could possibly follow. They were pretty diligent. Now, I will say it didn't make any sense for me how they couldn't find Mr. June. The description of a one-eyed black man in a small town in Arkansas, that's pretty distinct. That's a very distinct look. I also feel like, I don't know, like we're in a small town. Why wasn't this man, nobody, anytime it was like one-eyed black man, we got led to another town. It just didn't make sense for me. Also, can't we look up like somebody getting disability? One eye tells me you have some kind of vision issue, but I don't know. That was kind of annoying for me because it's just such a distinct look. I also find it extremely contrived that kids never told their dad or anyone else about meeting the lady and Mr. June in the woods to play. Come on now, man. Look, kids are notorious for always running their damn mouth, okay? Telling stuff you don't want them to tell folks. Like, they would just blurt some ish out. So, yeah, that part of the story didn't work for me. I do not see young kids, keeping a secret like that. I was also kind of annoyed with the teacher. I felt like it should have been common sense kind of for her to tell Hayes about the conversation she was having with Lucy Purcell. There was a lot of red flags in what Lucy Purcell was saying in that conversation. And I feel like had Hayes and Wes heard those things, it would have raised eyebrows for them. It would have raised suspicion. Because that was some weird stuff to be saying when your kids, you got this whole, your kids is missing. And I feel like that she was weak. I think they could have got her to talk and spill things, but they didn't have that information. Now, I will say I'm a little unclear on a certain aspect once we get to the end. So we learned that the little girl who was abducted and missing was drugged from the age of like 9 or 10 by the crazy lady. And then she is able to run away, ends up on the streets, and dies of HIV, right? That's the conclusion to the case that Hayes and Wes are able to get from Mr. June and the nuns at that little house where she ended up going to not a house, whatever, the convent. I don't know what that place was called. Side note, I wasn't the biggest fan of having Mr. June just tell the audience what happened. It felt a bit anticlimactic for me, but in their defense, I guess there was no other way for Hayes and Wes to get this truth. They found the room the little girl had been held in that mansion, but there was no way for them to get the entire truth except to hear the account of it from someone who was there. It also kind of broke my heart that they didn't get the truth about the dad and that it wasn't their interrogation that led him to do that to himself, that he actually found that room and that was done to him. But back to my point, Hayes ends up concocting this story in his mind with the help of his dead wife, which is, for me, obviously just his mind's projection of her. He concocts this whole thing that the nuns lied and the girl being dead was for her protection because they knew powerful people were after her, and that little boy who had a crush on her was able to recognize her all this time later as an adult and knew who she was even though she didn't know who she was, and that she is his wife. His wife is the missing girl, right? Now, I'm unclear on if that was real or if that was just his diminishing mind coming up with that. But the way the show ends with Hayes getting the complete truth, maybe, and finding the missing girl, but then not being able to remember why he was in that neighborhood, that was so sad and frustrating and disappointing. I was watching this so upset, like, baby, call Wes. in their right mind while we doing this. But like I said, I don't know if that's real or something his mind like made up. Maybe that blind white lady is not, it's just a blind white lady, not the little girl. But the visual, like that shot of young Hayes in the war at the end, disappearing into the jungle alone, mesmerizing. This season truly just blows me away all around. I said how I like season 2 a lot more the first time around and less so this recent rewatch. I love season 3 just as much on this recent rewatch as I did when it aired years ago. I almost feel like it's aged so well that I kind of like it even more so now. Like I loved it then, but I kind of feel like I loved it a lot more this time around. Now, what I will say is I don't like how the rich lady who was mentally ill, who is the one who accidentally killed the little boy and then holds the girl hostage, as her daughter to replace her daughter that died. And she had help from other people, but she's the ultimate culprit. If I'm remembering correctly, she doesn't even exist until the end when we find this out. And if that's the case, and I'm remembering right, I don't like that. When we're dealing with a mystery that the audience is along for the ride of solving, I feel like we should have got that piece. Like, for example, in season 1, we see the Childress guy a few times before it's revealed that he's the killer, even though they're small moments. And I distinctly remember the second time we see him, I literally was like, it's him. It's him. But I just feel like the culprit shouldn't just suddenly exist at the end. And like season 2, we discovered the history of the diamonds and that the parents who were robbed are killed and they had 2 kids and went into foster care. So at that point, it's up to the audience to do with that information, like what they made, like, you know, maybe speculate and say, hey, maybe the kids are grown now and they're the ones behind the murder, whatever the hell. But I just feel like we shouldn't. And we met the sister, we just didn't know that's who it was. But I just feel like you don't just suddenly bring someone up at the end. We can't speculate in season 3 because we aren't given the info that rich lady even exists. Like, we know that family exists, but again, I could be remembering wrong. Like, maybe we were told about her. I don't remember being told about her. And also, the case wasn't solved for me because of incompetence by our lead detectives, but it is yet another example of coming to conclusions based on assumptions and the higher ups just wanting to wrap a case up just so I like that thread being added in there. Now, what I would personally love to see in the next season of True Detective, where I thought they were going to go with the season 4. In season 3, they introduced the online amateur detectives trying to solve a cold case, right? That's what sparks all this up when Hayes is elderly. I actually think that would be a really interesting, like, we could follow the online sleuths as the main detectives, and they could connect with the original detectives who are elderly at that point. I don't know. I think that would be a great idea and something different for this series. A new type of detectives, you know what I mean? So, in conclusion, that is my breakdown and ranking of every season of True Detectives. It has always been so confusing to me why people hate season 2. If you gonna cape for season 2, let me know in the comments, because it's a solid season. Okay, it's flawed, yes, but people really like shit on season 2, and I don't understand why. But I would like more. A season that, you know, focuses more on like the action and shootouts like season 2 did. Let me know your ranking of the True Detective seasons in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.